Hi, I'm Mimi Chan. Welcome to Culture Chat. Thanks for joining the conversation. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Culture Chat Tuesday. In this episode, I have a conversation with Anthony Olvera in honor of Hispanic Heritage Month. We discuss his heritage and growing up in Orlando, Florida as a Mexican American. Anthony's father was deported back to Mexico when he was a senior in high school. He shared what this experience was like and how it affected him and his family. America is founded on immigrants, and their contribution to this country is immense. It frustrates me that the word immigrant is so widely misunderstood and jaded today due to politics. I'm grateful Anthony shared his story and experience and hope you listen with an open mind. I'm loving these conversations and hope you are too. If you are, please rate my podcast on your platform of choice. If you'd like to support with a donation and help keep this podcast going, you can become a patron of the show by visiting my website or patreon.com. For comments or suggestions, email me at mimi@culturechatpodcast.com or reach out on social media at SifuMimiChan. Now, on with the show. Hello, Anthony. How are you today?
I'm great. How about yourself?
I'm well. It's been a crazy year, actually. And some of the things that kind of keep me going is that I get to connect with people that I enjoy talking to. So I'm so glad you're here talking to me today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, you and I know each other from a long line of you were really young and you came into the Kung Fu school, and I know the very young Anthony, and now you're here all grown up. And it's really nice because you and your brother and your whole family have known for such a long time, but you're able to come and still do some work for us at the temple, and I get to see you and catch up. And so catching you the other day, I thought, oh my goodness, I need you on my podcast so we can talk about stuff.
Yeah, I know it was a tough decision to make, but it's happening, and I'm glad I'm doing it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's very timely. There's so much going on in the world, and it's also Hispanic Heritage Month, quote unquote, because I guess it goes from the 15th of September to the 15th of October, and we can get into that later. But
Yeah.
I thought it would be really good because, you have your representation with your background, and you and I often get into worldview things and politics and different kind of discussions when I get to see you. And it's always nice to get a younger point of view. And so I love talking to you. And, one of the things that you and I have discussed is that you and I both truly believe immigrants is kind of what makes this country. It's founded upon, the immigrant experience. And it's really frustrating that that word has become so widely misunderstood and jaded because of today's politics. And it's something I kind of want to jump into. But before we do that, as you know, my husband Oscar is of Dominican descent, and he grew up in his home speaking Spanish as his first language. And then his parents were like, you go to school, you'll learn English. So you speak Spanish first. Was that kind of your experience, or did you learn English right away?
Well, that's my experience, and from like the very first start, I started speaking Spanish. Spanish was my first language up until I would say until kindergarten. After that, English kind of took over. Mm-hmm. And at this time, even with my kids, my son knows how to speak Spanish, but it's kind of tough for me now that I speak more English that I make him talk Spanish, even though now he's the one that's convincing me to talk Spanish. He's like, hey, Papa, talk Spanish. And I'm like, oh my goodness. He's right, I should be speaking Spanish.
Yeah.
But
I think it's super valuable to have have that dual language and to be able to communicate and also to have that heritage, right? To like kind of preserve the culture. But when you went to kindergarten, kind of what was that earliest memory? Because it's amazing how children are able to pick up multiple languages easier. Like it's just this natural transition. Whereas like me as an adult, I've tried to learn Mandarin and it's been like a very failed experiment. It's tough. It's not easy when your brain is this old, but do you remember having any difficulty, or was it just like an easy transition?
Well, I remember having some issues with, I guess, how I spoke. I had ESOL for about 5 years. Mm-hmm. But I think I can't recall being bullied or picked on for not speaking English. I think it just picked up so quickly that honestly, I don't even remember speaking Spanish in school.
Did
Yeah,
you
at
did
this
you
point.
watch a lot of TV shows that kind of helped you along with the English? That's usually a
I think,
way.
yeah, I think that's what it was. I think some TV definitely helped, especially also seeing how kids these days are learning English and Spanish so quickly at the same time. My kid's 4 years old, and he speaks pretty good. Well, he speaks great English and he speaks decent Spanish. So yeah, I think TV definitely helps. And I think maybe that's how it helped me as well.
What shows did you watch growing up?
Barney, Teletubbies. Barney. That's what I. That's the only one I can recall at this time.
Yeah.
And I guess what's the other one? Um, I don't know. I just watched a bunch of random TV.
Yeah,
Even
yeah.
Telemundo, for example, to learn Spanish.
Telemundo, of course, of course. I mean, there's a lot of beautiful people on Telemundo, so it's kind
Yeah.
of hard. I mean, even me, I don't speak Spanish. I try to learn and whatnot, but I mean, it's hard to scroll by Telemundo and not stop. There's a lot going on there, right? Uh, so you're the Barney generation. Okay, so have
I
you
think so.
seen Barney in anytime recently?
No, not at all. I think that's creepy a little bit.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you how you feel like it holds up, or do you look back and
Yeah.
go, man, why did I like Barney? It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, it's it. I don't know. I just feel like it's a little creepy. But I see today's kid shows; they're very informative. I don't remember Barney being that informative.
For example, what is your son watching?
Right now, he's watching a lot of Wait, there's a. Well, he's looking at Cleo and Coquine, which is just like I guess a girl trying out a bunch of jobs, I guess,
Okay. Okay.
and a lot of Paw Patrol,
Oh
a
yeah, Paw
lot of,
Patrol is super popular.
and there's also a little kid. What is it called? It's about like the sea life. He likes watching a lot
Okay.
of sea life
All right.
videos.
I am not up to date on my kid TV. I do the best I can since I am a teacher and I try to connect with the kids. Although these days I usually just have to drop the word Minecraft and all of them turn and look at me and they're totally engaged.
My son, luckily, isn't too into Minecraft. David's
Well, he's
kids,
still
my brother,
young.
yeah, David's kids love Minecraft.
Yeah,
My
I
brother,
think there's something addictive about it because it's like taken over that generation. It's
yeah,
it's kind of
because
crazy.
I tried to relate and it doesn't work. It's so hard to understand what's going on in that game.
Isn't that interesting? Because you are still relatively young, sir. You're in your 20s. And so for our listeners, but it's interesting how you already see this generational gap. Like, what is Minecraft about? I mean, it's interesting that it makes you, especially as a parent, I'm sure, go, wow, like I'm a real adult now. Like it's for real, right?
Yeah, it gives you a perspective of how fast time flies. I have a constant reminder that yes, I am getting older.
We are all there with you. So, and you mentioned going to school and learning English, and you had your brothers growing up, and so you guys all kind of came in as a pack. You were never really alone, but you grew up in the late 90s, early 2000s, in Orlando, Florida, correct?
Yes, correct. My whole life.
Yeah, and so for me, I felt that at that time, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, like the Hispanic and Latino community was very prevalent even, and so you probably um were not kind of feeling how I felt, for instance, in the 80s growing up, where I felt like a minority. Like most of everybody in my school was Caucasian or white, and just didn't, I didn't feel like there was a lot of culture. So how was kind of that? I feel like it was a very
Well,
different world.
yeah, I think I can see that. In the area I lived in, which was on Goldenrod when I was growing up, was practically all Spanish.
Right.
I'm not entirely sure if I can recall any Mexicans, but I can recall a lot of Puerto
A lot of
Ricans,
Puerto
Spanish
Ricans, right?
speakers. Yeah, a lot of Spanish speakers. So I didn't really feel left out or out of
Hmm.
place.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and then up until I think the only place I might have felt like a little out of place was eventually we moved over to like the Winter Park area,
Ah,
and there was a little bit of a difference because the Spanish, well, Mexicans, there was zero Mexicans in my school at the time. Puerto Ricans, there were very few, but
mhm.
there was some. So I experienced that. But in when growing up, I did see a lot of Spanish people,
Yeah, yeah. So
Puerto Ricans. I didn't feel left out.
yeah, it does make a difference in how I see generationally kids grow up and how their behavior is, because there is just more confidence. There's a lot more inclusion and that sense of belonging. And you mentioned that you didn't really have a lot of discrimination growing up. Did you or any of your brothers ever experience any kind of dissonance or conflict because of what you look like?
I would say maybe my brother David and my older brother Beto Francisco.
Francisco?
They came at an older age, around 13 to 14 years old, and they didn't speak any English at all.
They came
Um,
from Mexico.
they came from Mexico at the time, yes. Which at that time, when you're in middle school, where kids are more, I think, rough.
Cruel. Go ahead and
Yeah,
say it. It's true. They're in a
yeah,
transitional age. They
yeah.
don't know who they are, and it is what it
They're,
is.
yeah, they're trying to show their dominance towards other kids, I
Yeah.
guess. And I think, I mean, seeing them, I know that they were in several fights only because they were picked on.
Yeah.
And at that time, all they could do is defend themselves, even if it was physically, because that's how it ended up being practically. David, over time, learned English, and now he has more inclusion with whatever he does. Francisco practically never learned, and he just practically called it, and he left back to Mexico.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was that like? Because you were really young. You guys have a bit of an age gap. Like, do you remember kind of them coming home from the fight? Did you understand why they were picked on? Or is that just more in your elder years that you kind of look back and go, oh, wow, that was literally because they were being picked on because, they speak Spanish or they look different?
Well, actually, that was a conversation me and my brother David had recently, where he would practically say most of his fights were practically just because people were picking on him because he didn't speak English. Because we have that conversation often about, because I like to see his point of view and see how he was raised. Because I don't, we have such a huge gap that maybe he could explain something to me that's happening. Because I just get curious practically, and since we work together, we sit side by side all day and it's like, hey, let's have this conversation, and it just pops up and we end up talking about it, which is why I know about it now.
Yeah.
So I didn't know back then what was going on.
Yeah. It's kind of nice to have that ignorance is bliss thing as a child. Like, you have this kind of childhood memory, and it's so fascinating. And I love the fact that you and your brother work together and you guys are so close and you're able to share these things. It's a really special thing. And I think that's something that your father instilled in you, is that brotherhood and you guys being very
Yes.
close. Because I will tell you, you boys rolled up, you and your dad, the Olvera family came in strong when you guys showed up at my Kung Fu school, like, a huge family unit. And it was always you guys together. And I remember meeting you all for the first time and seeing you, and Oscar, being our
Yeah.
Spanish ambassador. He, befriended you guys because, of course, some of you didn't speak English, right? And so
Yeah.
he's still to this day is our Spanish ambassador. We're always like, Oscar habla español. Somebody's on the phone. They need to talk to you. And so, yes, we are on Goldenrod, everyone.
Yes.
Those of you in Orlando. And so that is probably how you found us. But out of curiosity, I think, generally speaking, and this might sound like a stereotype, but I think a lot of Latinx, a lot of Hispanic heritage enjoys martial arts. Like, that's kind of a thing,
Yeah,
right? Is that
definitely,
not a
definitely.
stereotype? That's kind of a fact, right?
Practically a fact. I think even prior to joining Kung Fu, my dad enjoyed any martial arts movie that gets his hands on. Like, every single time a martial arts movie went out on theaters, we're gonna go. I was like, all right, we're gonna go. Even at the time, I was like, okay, I guess.
Do you remember like your first one, or like one that was memorable for you that you guys went to?
Well, I can't recall. I know I can think of only one name, but it wasn't like, I think that was after Kung Fu. It was like Bulletproof Monk.
Okay.
I remember
Okay.
that one.
Yeah. The
And
Italian fat.
yeah, but then before that, he would always have like, we would go to the corner rental store, DVD rental store, and he would rent so many, and they were doing like kung fu moves, jumping over bamboo sticks. That's the only one I can remember. I don't remember the name, but my dad, yeah, he enjoyed them so much. He watched them over and
Right.
over.
So that's what took you guys to Kung Fu, not because David and Francisco were getting beat up at school, or
No,
was it a little bit of both?
I think it's my dad's like for the art, and
Yeah.
he likes for us to defend ourselves practically.
Yeah.
And have defense at least.
Yeah. Well, as you know, I adore your father, and he is somebody who immediately made an impression on me because he's really not just a hard worker. Like, he's an unbelievably hard worker, but he's so generous and selfless. Like, I really believe, regardless of your fame or fortune or status, that each person in life has this ability to touch someone else's life or make an impression for the better and do something. And I can really honestly say your dad's like one of those guys. He's made our lives better through his kindness. And we think about him all the time because literally there's a memory in my head where I told your dad, I really want this temple to be painted like really fire engine red. Like I wanted it to be more red because it was kind of orange. And for those of our listeners who don't know, Anthony's father owned like a painting business, basically. I mean, you guys did a lot of other things in construction and whatnot, but like painting was
Was
the
what started everything.
primary, right? Like that was the thing. And there's this image of just like him and like 20 guys, maybe it wasn't that many, and it's just in my head, but like all of a sudden they were all there and the whole temple got painted. And he really did so much out of the goodness of his heart, but also his love for the people around him. Like that is how I think about your father. Like when he decided to do something and he said he was going to do something, he did it, and he did it wholeheartedly. And for those that don't know, most people who listen know I'm a martial artist, I teach kung fu, and there's this dynamic between your sifu and your students. And he really, not being of Chinese culture, like he really embraced that. Like he's like, our sifu, this is something I can do for my sifu. And he did it. And it was, like I said, I see the temple every day. And so I think about your dad all the time because
Yeah.
he basically made it, look like what it does, and amongst many other things he did. And so what can you tell me about your memories of like your dad growing up and his work ethic and, what that relationship is like for you when you were younger?
Yeah. Well, I can recall so much of it only because everyone I practically talked to is like, "Hey, how's your dad?" Since we still deal with a lot of the people he dealt with.
Yeah.
Actually, a lot of the trust is transferred over to us because of my dad. They're like, "I'm giving you this opportunity because I love your dad." And
Yeah.
I was like, "Oh, absolutely, we'll respect it 100%." But what I can recall from my dad is like from the very beginning of time, like I have such a good vivid memory about the beginning, from practically starting from the bottom, almost, I guess you could say.
Mm-hmm.
We lived on back in the days, it was called Old Cheney, in a quadplex,
Mm-hmm.
in a one bedroom quadplex with me and my brother Roy at the time. And my mom practically was the one that got my dad into painting. And once my dad, found painting, he actually loved it. He was like, "I'm gonna continue with this," and practically started running a giant, someone else's painting company. When that owner got sick, and he embraced it so much because he loves to learn and learn the business himself. Where at the end of the day, the owner of that company said, "Hey, I'm gonna end up closing the company. You should take over the contacts," and that's what my dad ended up doing,
Okay.
and rolling with it practically. And his work ethic has always been business, 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 but at the same time, it's doing a great job. Make sure that you do whatever you can to make people happy. It's practically is showing or being able to transfer the happiness that you have doing something over to someone else, and show pride in your work is practically what I always saw in him, or what he also instilled in us practically.
Yeah. Yeah, and that does carry over to both of you. So you and your brother pretty much took over, run that business, and you are doing other things, but it stemmed from that seed that he planted, right? And you guys
Yeah.
started working with him. I mean, did you think that you would end up kind of carrying on his work, or what did you think you were gonna do when you grew up, quote unquote?
Honestly, I didn't think I was gonna continue doing it. I thought I was gonna go to college, and which I did go to college for a little bit. It
Mm-hmm.
just for about a year and a half or 2 years. I went for 2 years, and it just didn't feel right. I was more of a hands-on person. I like
Yeah.
to work with my hands, and so yeah, I didn't see myself being in construction or painting at all. It just ended up going back to where I'm comfortable on
Mm-hmm.
that portion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did he ever like do you cuz I know your older brother David, started working with him pretty early on and had been learning with him side by side. So did you learn stuff directly from your dad or just mostly from David? Or like do you remember having times where he would teach you something or work with you?
Well, yeah, I think the beginning, like, foundation work was set by my dad. Um But at the time, as I believe I was like 10 or 11 years old.
Mm-hmm.
You're just thinking, when am I ever gonna do this? When am I gonna do that? And the next thing you know, my dad set the foundation, and with Dave, he practically just reminds me or gives me other suggestions, and then I still call my dad to see if, just double check what was going on. Like, do you have any other recommendations on how to get this done effectively?
Yeah.
And then he will still be like, well, I would recommend this, and maybe this is a little bit off, or maybe it's exactly the same, but I still have two people I can kind of say, you know what, I'm gonna take this route and see how it works out. If it works out, great. If it doesn't, we'll try this other way.
Yeah, it's so nice to be able to have that support and kind of that, not just your father, but a mentor in your profession. Because let me tell you, everyone, I tried to paint my wall once, and I immediately was like, why am I doing this? And I just called your dad because, I got a new house, and I was like, okay, I'm going to try to do this. And everyone always talks about them painting their rooms. And then I was like, what the heck am I thinking? I know why would I do this to myself? And immediately, once again, your dad and his crew came and just like made magic, and my home looked amazing. And so, yeah, it is an art. It is hard work, and to do it right anyway. Like, anybody can paint a wall, I think, but to do it right is a whole nother thing, right?
Yeah, there's always some little details you got to pay attention.
Yeah, there's that professionalism. And so, I mean, I've known you almost your whole life, really, if you think about it. You came to us when you were like 7 or 8 maybe, or something crazy.
75% of my life. So
yeah. You were just a little guy. And it's been so cool to see you kind of evolve into the human that you are, and see that kind of rooting from who your dad is and what he's instilled in both you and your brother. Because you two are the ones I really see the most. And I'd like to kind of, if you don't mind sharing, kind of talk to you about the fact that your dad wasn't a citizen, and therefore in the last, several years, there's been so many things that have happened with this country and the immigration policies and deportation. And I know there was a really traumatic time for you because your dad did in fact get deported because he's not a citizen, despite the fact that he built up this company here, worked his butt off night and day, and was, a very stand-up part of the society. Like, what was that like for you? And if you don't mind sharing, like, kind of that story and that timeline.
Yeah, well, crazy enough, I actually didn't know he wasn't a citizen up until like maybe 15 or 16, or maybe 15 years old, I would say, practically. I didn't realize he was not a citizen. I guess that conversation was always just avoided. So since we always were raised in such a, I think, standard household where if something was needed to get done, it would get done. You would never really question just the normal way you're raised. And I honestly never thought he could get deported or would get deported, since we're practically, I would consider almost an American family, since the way we're raised is practically very American. My dad loves American values, loves any traditions practically he can get his hands on. He loves to embrace them. So what was the question?
When you were 15 or 16, that's when you found out that he wasn't a citizen. And then that it kind of led up to the day where so many things in this country has changed, and he did have to get deported.
Yeah, so what happened was, at that point, he ended up getting in a little bit of a situation, which is practically a minor situation for if me and you get pulled over or something happens, worst case scenario, we get maybe a ticket, or we end up just getting, worst case scenario, this is absolutely worst case scenario, you go to jail for a night, and then you get released next morning. Yeah. And in this situation, it was more of a taken to jail. Next thing you know, it was such a quick situation happening where me and my brothers were getting in contact with his lawyer, trying to figure out what was happening. Next thing you know, there was an immigration hold. At that point, we were thinking, what do we do then? And within a couple, I would say, like the 3 days, we realized, oh, he's already in Miami for immigration. So what else can we do? So we ended up trying to either set up a court hearing. Within 2 weeks, he had a court hearing, and they practically, he said if he wanted to plead guilty or not guilty. If he pled guilty, he would he would just say a voluntary deportation. So deportation was the only option at that point, apparently. Um, and I can also recall at the time he actually had a couple, I would say, big projects going on. One project that was worth well over the millions at the time, and so there was a lot of work work situations, work problems going on, and him being in jail caused me and my brothers to practically stress over I would say, our senior year, since that happened in my senior year, trying to get these projects done, also while dealing with deportation situation. Since he pled not guilty to the charge, he was practically held in jail for over like 2 months, I believe, for that one opportunity to probably plead your case, which the case was maybe like a 2 minute long hearing, and he was practically just said, hey, guilty. So whatever, I can't recall whatever the lawyer said,
Yeah.
but it was practically not guilty, pled the case, but they only had so much time since the immigration cases go so fast, the judge just said guilty, deported. Next, like within the next 2 days, he was already in Mexico, called me from Mexico, and he was practically telling me step by step on how to close out that final project. That way it's not left in shambles practically, because there was already so much work invested into it.
Yeah.
Closed it out, and that was practically the last job we did for his company, practically under that name.
Yeah, and that is so typical of your father to, even though his entire life has just been flipped upside down, make sure that he finishes a commitment that he started. He wanted you guys to finish that, get it done, because it affects so many people. You guys, I had the pleasure of being able to meet a lot of the crew and the people that worked with your father, and he treated everyone like family. He bent over backwards for every single person, helped a lot of them out of situations as well. Like, I know how he is with the goodness of his heart. And so even though he literally just got deported, had to leave his entire family, he's here like, okay, here, you got to get this stuff done first. Don't let this fall to the wayside. And that is so typical of your dad. But I'd like to talk a little bit about you for a moment, because you were a high schooler, which means you're about, between 16 to 18. And that is a lot of pressure to put on you and your brothers, because your brothers are all, at that point, maybe from the lower 20s to your age, because you're the youngest.
Yes.
You're the baby. But obviously you guys all as a unit were, trying to help your father out, and that kind of rested on your shoulders. Is that because you were primarily the English speakers and you guys were just basically the ones that kind of fell on?
Yeah, I mean, over here in the US, the only family we have is practically me and my brothers, and an uncle in Chicago. That's practically all of our US roots, practically.
Yeah.
So the only person who could actually pick up on it is me and my brothers. And at the time, his wife wasn't really the trustworthy one.
Okay. Yeah. Yes.
So
Yes.
it couldn't fall on her.
Yeah.
Yeah. So at that time, it was up to me and my brothers. Which at that time, David was doing something else. He wasn't in the construction field either. I think he might have been in the construction field, but he wasn't associated with my dad at the time.
Yeah.
And neither was Roy. Was a waiter at the time, and actually most of it fell down to me.
Yeah.
Since I was in high school, I didn't have a job. I can recall having this conversation with my teachers, and since I was practically a straight A student, they all understood that I got to step out of class, take a phone call, and get this accomplished, like work-related stuff. And I could actually have a friend who I rent a room out to actually recalls that one time I had to talk to the teacher, go outside, have a conversation about work, and then come back into class. So at the time, it fell down to me to close out these projects, and with a little bit of assistance from my brothers when they had some time off of work, to come and assist me with what was happening.
Yeah, that is a lot of pressure, Anthony. I mean, you should feel really proud of yourself for not just sticking it out and being able to still be accomplished in school, but like I teach a lot of kids that at that was your age at the time, right? And the fact that you're able to communicate to them, like, here's what needs to happen, here's what I'm doing, here's how I need to divide my time, like those skill sets are invaluable now as an adult human, right? And there are skill sets that a lot of the kids today don't really have yet, or haven't had that opportunity to learn yet. And the fact that you were able to do that is remarkable. But I think that you're also okay, I'm given this situation, I'm just going to do it and go. But there must have been a lot of emotional trauma as well. Like, your dad's in jail.
Yeah.
He's the guy who you go to for your problems. He's your rock. He's kind of that mentor. He's who you go to kung fu movies with. And so not only do you have to take over his company at this point and get these loose ends tied, but you can't even see him and talk to him and be with him and comfort him. And, that business side of you, I get, but I'd like to kind of tap into that 17-year-old Anthony who then had to go, my dad's
Yeah.
not here. I mean, how was that for you?
Oh, I think that was I kind of blocked that portion out, but
Yeah.
I think I think it was traumatizing in the sense of in the way someone how do I explain myself? It's like the only person who can practically teach you anything is gone, and to know that after he's gone, you're not going to see him up until you can afford to go over there. Because at the time, I'm thinking I have no income. I know that everyone at that time, the only person who actually had a good income was my dad. My brothers were practically trying to focus on themselves. Their incomes weren't that great. And so it took me about 6 years for me to grow up a little bit, obviously, and have the opportunity to see my dad again. Because at the time, I was still trying to get all my how do I don't know how to explain
No,
it.
you're doing fine. This is not
um
easy to talk about. So you're doing
yeah,
fine.
so
Thank you for sharing.
no problem. So at the time, I was trying to figure out myself what my next move was after high school in order to either make more money or even survive at the time. Because um even with all the stuff that my dad had going on, all the money he had was practically going to finishing up those jobs, and to his wife at the time, who also had many things with him, like properties, cars, that my dad owned. And at that time, me and my brothers were kind of left just practically
On your
fighting
own.
for ourselves at the time.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was a tough situation to go through when it just happened overnight practically.
Yeah. I mean, you're really just thrown into, this is your life. Like, typical high school student basically goes and they do, school, and they're worried about exams and, oh my goodness, and my boyfriend or girlfriend. Like, their worries are very different. Not to diminish the hardships of being a high school student, but this
Absolutely.
is a lot to put on someone of your age. And then even in your 20s, your younger 20s, for you to be thinking about, okay, my next step is, I'd love to see my father again. How can I do this? You and I have shared conversations even to this day about, okay, what's the next step? How can we get your dad back here? Like, this is obviously fallen on you. Like, you feel this sense of responsibility. Is there a reason you feel so strongly that it's something that you need or want or have to do? Like, you seem to take this on your shoulders. Like, I feel like you're really kind of taking it on yourself.
I mean, I take it personally, because I feel like this man is practically the only reason I am who I am today. He invested a lot of energy, a lot of his personal time, and a lot. He was able to instill so much into us. In other words, he practically gave us his everything to make us who we are today, to end up in the situation he's in today. And I feel like that's the least I could do. And now I feel like he's missing out a lot, that he could actually like spend time with us.
Yeah. Spend time with you, spend time with his
Us,
grandchildren.
his grandchildren that he now has.
Yeah, yeah, I understand. It's definitely not easy, and I think he's probably really, really unbelievably proud of you, Anthony. As am I, as your former kung fu teacher. I'm once your sifu, always your sifu, and I'm so proud of the person that you and especially David have become. And and getting to see that, and I know that he's proud of you, and it's so moving. I know it's hard to talk about, and again, I appreciate you being so open and honest, but like you didn't even get to say goodbye properly, you
That's
know?
practically one of the things that bothered us, all of us, the most, since
Yeah.
it
What was
happened so
that
fast.
day like for you? Like it just must have been so surreal.
I think we were all like in disbelief. We all thought it was practically something that could be changed so quickly. Like we thought it was easily resolvable, since most of in our entire lives practically we didn't really deal with something that was like, hey, set in stone, he's gone.
Yeah.
Or we it wasn't a life loss, but it was definitely someone that you see every single day, take for granted. Hey, I see this person every day,
Yeah.
and now the only option is to talk to him over the phone is and gone. And he's trying to deal with his own situation over there, since it was a tough situation. Not only that, I think at the time we didn't realize how bad Mexico was.
Yeah.
That the first phone call I actually had was my dad. He asked for $50. I sent him $50, so he can catch a bus ride to his hometown. And I sent him the money, and at the time I was still trying to figure out how to even send money to Mexico, since it was my
Yeah.
first
I
time.
wouldn't even know how to do that.
Yeah, and he actually ended up getting robbed on the bus
Oh.
after he bought his ticket. So
Oh my God.
the first thing that happened the minute he got into Mexico, he got dropped off in I can't. It's one of the most dangerous cities in Mexico, and he ended up getting the money from a regular gas station where you get your money from,
Okay.
and he got out, bought a bus ticket, got on the bus, and apparently from somewhere in between, someone must have said that, hey, this guy just picked up this amount of money.
Yeah, they probably sit there
Yeah,
and watch, right? Like, because
yeah,
they know
and
that's where people get money.
yeah, and they stopped the bus. They hopped on the bus and they practically said, hey, we know you got money from this store. You either have two options: you get off the bus and we take you, or you give us the money. And my dad said, "Hey, here's the money." Um, so from dealing with that situation to seeing what kind of situation he's in now, we were just like in disbelief, and we were all just trying to scramble a plan together. Which honestly, it I don't even think we figured out a plan until like maybe months after we realized what was happening.
Yeah. I mean, I've been to the part of Mexico that literally is just a tourist area on like a resort side, and also like a cruise ship pulls up to. And Oscar and I have talked about, we know people that have been going, oh, we're gonna be working in Mexico City or going here or there. We're like, I don't know, it feels kind of dangerous. Like it is not for the faint of heart. Like literally, even as a local, as somebody who speaks the language, grew up there, has a hometown there, like is getting robbed. That is, I mean, we're actually lucky that that was all, right? We're lucky,
Yeah,
like that's all that happened. And I think people get very far removed because we all do it. We all get very caught up in our lives. And the fact that there are so many places in this world that is really dangerous, and then to hear that that happened to your dad right away puts another layer of fear in you, not just like maybe I won't see him, but maybe something really bad's going to happen while he's gone. And that had to be just devastating for you, um and just like life changing. Obviously you had to grow up a lot faster than I think the average 19 year old to kind of deal with all these things. And I find it just so remarkable. And you and I you've talked about that. Well, if this happened to someone else, like say you get pulled over, maybe you get a ticket and all of these different things. And I don't think it's just the fact that he wasn't a citizen. I've had conversations on this podcast and in general, like Oscar and I have had very different stories of how we got pulled over. And
yeah,
there is a fact, and I don't want to go down that rabbit hole of all the things happening with the police right now and the discrimination and all of that, but that's a fact. Oscar's had experiences where he was completely discriminated against and treated, profiled, and whereas I've had lots of, oh, I didn't get a ticket, what, and it's just It's a radically different experience. And so it's not just like the fear of your life or getting a ticket, but what happened to your father. And so, I mean, that's a fact of life, that based on how you look, things can go very differently for you. And is that something as a father now that you look at your son and you worry about? Is it something that you see very differently, especially for our Black American community? I understand, and the people I've spoke to, it's part of like the education of your kids. Like, okay, here's what happens if you get pulled over. It's like a very different dynamic than, if you're not Black or brown, for instance.
Yeah, I can see that. I think if maybe he would have been someone else, or maybe just a different complexion, or presented himself differently, he might have still be here, obviously.
Yeah.
But
I mean, because your dad does sound Mexican when you speak to him.
he came here at 19, or I think it was 19 years old or 16 years old.
Yeah.
I can't recall. And not speaking a lick of English. And I think the fact that he was able to become the successful person he was really shows that his motives weren't like how our current president says it. What is it, a rapist or whatever?
Right.
He was simply here trying to live a better life.
Thugs and yeah.
He's not a thug. He wasn't here to steal anyone's job. If anything, he created jobs.
He did create a lot of jobs. Yeah.
So it doesn't make sense on how, well, practically his deportation cost people, at the time when he got deported, it was about 38 people, but 38 people's jobs at the time, because the minute that he got deported, that company was practically a sinking ship.
Yeah.
But his company at the time, at the biggest point of his job company, he had over 150 employees.
Right.
And that included immigrants, and it also included non-immigrants. And he was on the uphill climb when he did get deported. So who knows how big it would have been, and who knows how small it could have been. If we just will never know, since he ended up having that opportunity cut from him.
Yeah. I mean, and regardless of how many more, but like those 150 people, those lives were affected by this action, right? And so, you brought it up, and it's disgusting and frustrating and angering, and I wonder what it's like for you to have that feeling. And I have my own feelings about the president, because of course, being of Chinese descent right now is not very popular with COVID-19. And I understand from that level, but like I said, Oscar and I have very different experiences with law enforcement, very different experiences growing up. And when he moved from Brooklyn to here, his life changed too, right? There's so many things. But what does it feel like, as like you said, you identify as American because you were born here and you were raised here, but then your brothers, you could see, are immigrants. Your father is an immigrant. Like, you have this beautiful dynamic of having that, Mexican heritage. And so what does it feel like when the current president, that was apparently voted in not by the popular vote, but that is leading this country, expresses his desire to build a wall all the time, and that calls your culture and people like your father and asylum seekers and refugees, he calls them thugs and rapists and stereotypes, and is just hateful and obviously a white supremacist, in my opinion. But what does that feel like for you personally? Because like I said, you're a father now, so it's not even just on you. You worry for your children.
Well, in my opinion, I think being in the middle of a situation, having immigrants in my family and me seeing an actual U.S. citizen, I feel like he's causing, or what he's saying about building a wall and I understand border security. Mm-hmm. I understand it.
Of course.
But at the same time, immigrants are such an essential piece to our economy, and the knowledge they're able to bring into the U.S. plays a huge role in building this great country that we all get to be a part of.
Yeah.
And it's practically scaring people who may be able to provide more into this country to make it a little bit better, and causing the people who are either see themselves as better than everyone else to come on out and show their hate towards
Yeah.
people who may actually be citizens, but since they show a certain look to them, they're being discriminated against. Like for example, even me as a Mexican, I go into places and I feel some tension in there just because some people will look at me and they're like, either this guy is up to no good, or I get those looks every once in a while. I haven't had anyone. Well, I apologize. I have had one person talk bad about Mexicans, not knowing I was Mexican. I don't know what he thought I was, but um, it's bringing the people full of hate out, and making people feel either threatened, normal, regular U.S. citizens and immigrants as well, feel threatened only because I guess it's encouraged by our sitting president at this time.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not very political, but it does kind of scare me that someone in power can bring such hate out into the public and making it much more visible than before.
Absolutely.
And,
I mean,
and
that's been evident when we saw people marching with torches
yeah,
and our president did not say that was not okay. You know, he did
yeah,
not put that down. He did not shut that down and almost encouraged it. I mean, this is scary. I mean, we're talking back into the KKK timeframe, and we all know what happened then historically, and it's not okay. So you're right. It's divisive. It's hateful, and like you said, you get looks, right? Just based on one factor, and that's literally what you look like and the color of your skin, and
yeah,
Oscar says this stuff all the time. You know, my husband Oscar, he's like, it's scary. And he goes, can you imagine though if I were even darker, like some of my family members who are black? Like, can you imagine? It just keeps getting worse and worse with how you look. And that's the most absurd thing. But one of the things I enjoy about having these conversations and is that beforehand, I usually try to prep a little and learn a little. And I learned so much about the Mexican border and immigration. and you know, it's like you kind of have these snippets of what you know and understand. And like you said, I started off saying things like you were. I'm like, oh, I'm not political. And if you talk to me now, people are like, oh, you're super political. And I think the word political also ends up having this adverse meaning where it's like you don't have to know policy to be political. You don't have to know every amendment and the Constitution to be political. You can have an opinion and feel very strongly and believe in something and say, I am political in the fact that I believe immigrants are positive for this country. And I think it has this negative connotation that it doesn't need to have. And I think that we have to switch that dynamic. But you know what I learned was, you know, kind of how border crossing became illegal, and basically, you know, there was a time where Mexicans went back and forth because they worked here, they worked there. It was a free border. It was something that was encouraged. And then when these different bills got passed through history for different reasons, you know, we had the 20s. People didn't really see the border as a problem because honestly, Mexicans wanted to go back to Mexico. They wanted to work and get and be back and forth. It wasn't like they were trying to flood this country to create, you know, and take over and do all these things. It was very much like we work, we go back, we coexist in this
yeah,
really amazing way. And then of course, it actually this is something I didn't really realize. The immigrants weren't really seen as illegals, and it wasn't as patrolled actually until the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, which later brought about the 1917 Immigration Act, because actually the Chinese were the first to be, they were like, no, we don't want these migrants. And there was like all these zones that they banned. And then that trickled over to more prosecution of Mexicans. And that, you know, of course, as we progress, groups like the KKK and white supremacist people in politics started to put these harder restrictions. And it actually was really damaging because there was this great dynamic where Mexicans would actually contribute and field farm and work and do all this labor and go back and forth and be able to, you know, provide for their families. And it wasn't this big deal. And, you know, and as history progressed, through the different presidents, all of them, it just got worse and worse and worse. But, you know, I think it started primarily with in recent times, the Bush administration, like that was where things really started to lock down and it became this huge thing. And this building of the wall now is this symbolism for, to me, racism and exclusion. And of course we have to have border, like we can't just have in this modern day this like crazy flood of people going all over. But I mean, it's completely insane. So it's been fascinating to kind of delve into that and learn a little more on the technical side of things. And I'm not a history expert, or I know what I believe, but I always enjoy prepping for these interviews because it gives me a chance to kind of see a window and learn something. And of course, I talked at the beginning, this is Hispanic Heritage Month, and that starts on the 15th of September till October 15th. And I never understood, like, I don't understand, why is it mid-month to mid-month? Do you know by any chance?
Honestly, I didn't know until you told me.
Yeah, and that's one of the things, which is kind of like, why isn't this celebrated? Like, all we hear in the news is negativity, right? But right now, this is traditionally where it honors the cultures and contributions of both Hispanic and Latino Americans to, as we celebrate things that are rooted in those countries and their achievements and contributions of Hispanic Americans who have inspired others to achieve success. And I think about your dad, and he may not be a citizen, but he embodies that. And you embody that. And thanks to a fellow podcaster, Aaron from Geek in the City, he shared that it actually starts mid-month because September 15 is significant, as well as like September 16, et cetera. Like that's where a lot of these Latin American countries, and Mexico included, has their anniversary of independence. So it starts around that time.
I did know that one. Well, I mean, the beginning portion, not the ending.
Yeah. So I was like, oh, okay, that's so cool, and I think it's just so sad that gets overshadowed by constantly turning on the news and just hearing the BS that we have to hear all the time, or hearing our president say hateful things. Like, I think it's important to embrace and preserve heritage and see it as a positive versus a negative. And so, that's why I'm so grateful you're having this conversation, because this is kind of what that is as sad as a lot of this conversation is. It's still a celebration of what people like you and your father bring to the country. And I would go, and before we go down the rabbit hole of really getting too deep, but like, there's a huge thing that's important that to me and you, we talk about all the time, and it sounds stereotypical, but I always talk about food because I really feel that brings people together. And Mexican food in this country is really huge. Now, I laugh because if you call Chinese food American Chinese food, it's like laughable, but like seriously, are tacos really traditional? Like what do you consider that part of the heritage that's kind of been trickled over? There's like that American side of it, but like, what's traditional Mexican cuisine to you?
Well, I mean, honestly, it would be tacos, to be honest.
Yeah.
The reason why, I mean, there's several tacos, but when I talk about like it is traditional Mexican tacos, I would always go with just onion, cilantro, and whatever choice of meat. Now, don't say ground beef because that's not traditional. I would say like either you could go as far as like cow tongue, you could go steak, you could go chicken's very basic, but you could choose chicken. There's different types of actual beef you could choose that I would say as long as you stay on the traditional side of Mexican tacos, you will be having Mexican tacos. Like that trickles over. And in my opinion, I think that's like the most unifying food in between even people who don't like us too much.
They like tacos.
Everybody loves Taco Tuesdays. They made a holiday themselves for it. So even people who don't appreciate Mexicans, they can always appreciate the Mexican food. And if one taco makes them a little closer to liking us, and that's all it takes.
Oh my God, it's so beautiful. There is some truth to that, because food, I really feel, and I've said this like a zillion times on my podcast, I've talked about I've talked with so many different people and their organizations like Hunger for Feed America and all these things. I'm like, oh, if we just had a huge potluck, everyone brought their food, people would get along, man. Like it transcends what we look like if we just.
I think food is like the universal language
Right?
towards everyone. We can all relate that we all eat food.
That's right. That's right. And most of us enjoy it, especially Americans. We enjoy it a little too much, but it's so true. I feel like it's something that's just brings people together and brings such joy. And so I love talking about food on the show. And so I know it's been a pretty heavy podcast, so I wanted to kind of bring it on end it on the up note. But I remember I used to always want to make sure I fed your dad, like, because that's one of the things, my family is of course Chinese, but my mom is Jamaican, and a big thing is
Yeah.
food. And I always wanted to make sure he was eating. And there was a time he was doing work at my house, and I was like, okay, I want to make sure I feed you guys. And we were eating, and one of his guys was like, do you have pan? I need bread when we eat. That's just like a thing. Is that a preference of him, or is that like really Mexican? Is like bread kind of like you need to have bread?
I think with Mexicans in general, even with my dad would never touch a plate of food without either bread or a tortilla. He would always want one of the two. Like he would eat chicken wings, grab a tortilla, and just rip the meat off the chicken wing. I'm like, it's a chicken wing, Dad.
So basically, he's making a taco.
He's making a taco out of American chicken wings. It doesn't surprise me he doesn't eat French fries with tortillas.
Well, I read that tortilla originally it's because literally it'd be like a hand food, a finger food, like it would be used as the utensil to pick up food, right? And so how brilliant is that? Like you eat your utensils.
Yeah, my dad is that guy. He barely touches a spoon or fork. He's always scooping it up with tortilla every time.
I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. And so are there other parts of the culture that as you've gotten older you've embraced, or that you kind of recognize more, that you've connected with?
I think we were never short of having Mexican heritage, so I think it continues the same. If anything, I might have lost a little bit more, only since my dad was the one that practically like, hey, remember, it's this day, we're gonna do this, we're gonna go to this, we're gonna celebrate. For example, there's like a Catholic holiday that Mexicans celebrate, and we just go. We always we have either it's a couple of days of just every night praying, and we would always finish with like tamales. It's something called atole, which is like a hot drink, and I don't go to them as often as I would like anymore on December, like Christmas holiday, because he's not here anymore. But I kind of probably lost that, but continue with the rest of it as far as any regular celebration that we do.
I love it. I love it. Yeah. I love learning more about the cultures and the food, and I think it's great, and that you have that responsibility now to kind of teach your kids that what your dad taught you, and starts with Spanish speaking in the home. I think it's so valuable. Of course, I live in Florida, so practically it's practically like that second language here. But I think it's just remarkable for that next generation to be able to learn the language and the heritage, and kind of not to lose that as somebody who comes from a cultural background. I think that is American.
Correct.
And I think that is what is a huge misconception, that we who hold on to that culture of our extended birthplaces or whatnot, or where our parents come from, that is actually one of the most American things you can do, because this is a melting pot. This is where, unless you're Native American, you're an immigrant, and you're from an immigrant, right? And so that is what this country was founded on. And I think there's just a huge misunderstanding of what it means to be American. And so for you, I'd like to kind of wrap up with like what you define as being American, because that's how you define who you are. You started the episode with that, you feel like you grew up like a typical American household. And so how do you define that for yourself? Like, how would you describe that maybe to your kid?
Well, my definition of being American is having the liberty to practice anything you want. That includes your existing traditions and forming new traditions, and having the ability to not be judged for practicing anything that you were taught, just being able to wrap it up around what's currently going on today, and just being yourself. That's the most American thing you can do, is be yourself, enjoy what you had and enjoy what you have, and just make something new out of it. That's what
Absolutely.
I would say.
Very well said. Very well said. So, again, thank you so much for sharing part of your culture today, sharing such an intimate story about your father and being open. I really feel that it will help listeners kind of understand what it's like to lose a parent in this way and to go through this experience, and that it transcends a lot of what is stereotypical right now and what the current administration is going through. And not to make this political, people, but I mean, if you really believe that people of different heritage is not good for this country, you're wrong. But also for those of us that do believe and know people that have contributed, just like Anthony and his father and his family, and even my family, right? Like, get out there and vote. This is not a time to sit back and go, well, he's not going to win again, or, well, it doesn't matter. It does matter. Our votes matter. Your voices matter. And being yourself and the right to be who you are, just like Anthony said, matters. And so I urge listeners to get out there and be a part of the solution and not be a part of the problem, because a non-vote is being a part of the problem.
Yes, I agree. I've registered to vote already, so I'm definitely going to be voting this year. You sent me the link. I clicked the link.
Yes, and I will link that for everybody here too. Like, get out there and do it. And so, Anthony, thank you so much for being here and talking to me today and sharing. I super appreciate it, and it's always good to see you.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me. I know I was a little awkward, but I tried.
No, you're wonderful. You're wonderful. You're honest, and that's all I can ask for. So I will talk to you soon.
All right. Thank you.
That's all for today's episode. Thanks for listening to Culture Chat, and hope you enjoyed the conversation. Please subscribe and rate my podcast. Feel free to leave me suggestions or send an email to mimi@culturechatpodcast.com, or follow me on social media at Sifu Mimi Chan on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook.